My family told me I wasn't invited to my sister's engagement party. They said it was just for close family, like I was some distant cousin instead of the middle sister who had shared a bedroom with her for years. When I read the message from my mom, my hands went cold. I reread it over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. I could almost hear her voice, that casual, dismissive tone she used when she wanted to brush me aside without feeling guilty. It's a small gathering, Ivy. Chloe wants to keep it intimate. We hope you understand. I sat there on my couch, staring at the words on my phone. My fiancé Ethan glanced over, his brow furrowing when he saw my face. He asked me what was wrong, and as soon as I started explaining, I felt my throat tighten. I had always been the quiet one in the family, the middle child no one really looked at twice. Chloe was the star, the golden girl who could do no wrong. My parents doted on her, praised her every move, and shaped their lives around her milestones. My brother Luke was the baby, sweet and easygoing, the one they babied and protected. And me? I was the filler, the afterthought. I spent my whole life fading into the background to keep the peace. I kept my head down, built my career in event design from nothing, and learned not to expect support or applause. While they all obsessed over Chloe's latest achievements, I was quietly building my life with Ethan. He always saw me, always believed in me, and when he proposed last year, I finally felt like I had a future that was truly mine. But I never told my family about Ethan's background, about the world he came from, because I knew they wouldn't understand. Or worse, they'd try to claim my success as their own. When my mom told me I wasn't invited, something inside me snapped. It wasn't just about the party, it was about years of being pushed aside and treated like I didn't matter. The message wasn't just a polite exclusion, it was another reminder that, to them, I wasn't worth a seat at the table. I could feel the old wounds throbbing under my skin, every snide comment from my childhood echoing in my mind. Ethan listened quietly, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he took my hand in his and squeezed it gently. "You don't have to let them keep doing this to you," he said. "You're not invisible. You never were. You deserve to be seen." At that moment, I knew I couldn't just sit at home and watch the photos roll in on social media. I couldn't keep swallowing my pain to make them comfortable. For the first time, I felt a surge of anger that wasn't heavy or destructive. It was clarifying. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to let them decide where I belonged. I looked at Ethan, feeling my resolve harden. "We're going," I said, my voice steady. "We're going to that party, and they're going to see me, really see me." Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that told me he would stand beside me no matter what. And in that instant, I knew everything was about to change. The morning of Chloe's engagement party started like any other ordinary Saturday. The sun poured through the kitchen window as I stood there staring at my half-finished coffee, my mind already replaying the message from my mom for what felt like the 1,000th time. I could practically hear her careful, clipped voice saying it was just for close family, as though I were some distant cousin or an old friend who had drifted away, not the sister who had shared secrets, clothes, and late-night whispers with Chloe our entire childhood. Chloe had always been the star. She was the perfect daughter, with the perfect grades and the perfect smile. She could do no wrong, and no matter what she did, my parents rallied behind her like she was a queen. My mom, Laura, adored her, clinging to every one of her big announcements and fussing over her like she was made of glass. My dad, Richard, was a bit quieter about his favoritism, but he didn't need to say much. The way his eyes lit up whenever Chloe entered a room spoke louder than words. Meanwhile, there was me, Ivy, the quiet middle child who slipped through the cracks so seamlessly that some days I wondered if they even noticed I had grown up. I had learned to stay quiet to avoid arguments, to let my sister shine even if it meant shrinking myself until I was nearly invisible. By the time I was in high school, I realized that nothing I did would ever measure up. While Chloe was getting roses at her cheer competitions, I was backstage painting sets for the school play. While she got standing ovations, I got polite nods and quick glances before they turned back to her. I started working at a local florist shop when I was 16 and fell in love with color, design, and the way you could make people feel something just by arranging a space with intention and care. After college, I put everything I had into my event design business. I worked brutal hours, took impossible clients, and poured my heart into making strangers' milestones magical, all while my family ignored every small victory. If they noticed at all, they brushed it off as a cute little hobby. Ethan came into my life when I least expected it. We met at a vendor showcase I was working on, and he was different from anyone I had ever known. He didn't just see my work, he saw me. The late nights, the tears over difficult clients, the pride I felt when I finally saw an event come together perfectly. He celebrated my wins when no one else did, and held my hand through every setback. When he proposed to me a year ago in my tiny studio, it felt like I had finally stepped into a world where I was enough just as I was. But I kept him hidden from my family, partly out of fear they would try to claim him as a new trophy for Chloe's collection, and partly because I knew they would never really understand him or what he meant to me. That morning, as I stood in the kitchen, listening to the hum of the city outside, I could hear Ethan moving around in the bedroom, his calm presence grounding me even from across the apartment. I thought about all the parties I had planned for other people, the joyful moments, the big reveals, the tender speeches. I thought about how often I had made other families feel special, while mine left me out without a second thought. I scrolled through social media, my heart clenching as I saw photos of Chloe in a sparkling white dress, surrounded by smiling faces captioned, "Celebrating with our closest family and friends." The words stung like salt on a fresh wound. When Ethan walked into the kitchen, he looked at me for a long moment, his eyes soft but certain. "You don't have to do this," he said gently. But I knew I did. I had spent my whole life making myself smaller, bending to fit into a family that never really wanted to make space for me. I realized, standing there in my own home with the man who loved me unconditionally, that I didn't want to keep hiding. I didn't want to watch from the sidelines anymore. I wanted to step forward, claim my space, and finally show them that I was no longer the fragile, forgotten girl they could so easily dismiss. I looked at Ethan and nodded. "We're going," I said, my voice stronger than I had expected. He simply smiled, walked over, and pulled me into a warm hug that felt like armor being gently placed around me. As he held me, I knew I wasn't just going to that party to make a point. I was going to finally introduce them to the real me, the woman I had fought so hard to become. The drive to my parents' house felt longer than usual. Every mile seemed to stretch out endlessly as I watched the city skyline disappear behind us. I sat in the passenger seat, with my hands clasped tightly in my lap, staring out the window, but not really seeing anything. Ethan kept glancing over at me, his calm presence a silent promise that he wouldn't let me face this alone. My heart thudded so loudly I could almost hear it echoing in my chest. I replayed all the family gatherings I had attended over the years, the way I always sat at the edge of the room, quietly observing while Chloe held everyone's attention like a stage light. She was always the story, and I was the background noise, the extra detail no one really noticed. As we turned onto my parents' street, my mind wandered to the message my mom had sent me. "It's just for close family." Those words felt like a knife every time I remembered them. I wondered if she even hesitated before typing them, if there was even a flicker of guilt in her heart. Deep down, I already knew the answer. To them, Chloe's image was everything. I had always been too quiet, too different, too independent to fit into their carefully curated version of what a family should look like. When we finally pulled up, the driveway was overflowing with cars, and through the front windows, I could see groups of people gathered in the living room, holding drinks and laughing. The house was decorated with gold and white balloons, twinkle lights wrapped around the banister, and a big "Congratulations, Chloe and Mason" banner hanging over the entryway. I recognized neighbors, old family friends, and a few distant relatives, all people my parents had apparently considered close family. I felt a new wave of hurt wash over me, but under that pain was something stronger: resolve. Ethan turned the engine off and looked at me. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low but steady. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of years of silence pressing down on me. Then I nodded. "Yes," I said. "I'm done hiding." We stepped out of the car, and as we walked up the path, I felt my entire body tense. Every step felt like walking into a storm I had spent my whole life avoiding. The moment we pushed open the door, the noise inside seemed to collapse into a stunned hush. Faces turned, eyes widened, and for a few seconds, no one moved. I scanned the room and saw my mom standing by the dessert table, her face draining of color. My dad stood near the kitchen, gripping a glass so tightly his knuckles turned white. And Chloe, she was in the center of it all, her sparkling white dress shimmering under the lights. Her eyes met mine, and I watched her bright, charming smile falter and fall away. I could feel the guest's curiosity ripple through the room like a silent wave. Chloe's mouth opened, but no sound came out. I could almost see the calculations running through her mind, her carefully built narrative teetering on the edge of collapse. Before she could move or speak, Ethan stepped slightly forward beside me, his presence commanding but calm. Then something unexpected happened. Mason's mother, a poised woman with perfectly styled hair and sharp eyes, broke the silence. She let out a sudden gasp and hurried over, her face lighting up with recognition. "Ethan!" she exclaimed, her voice ringing across the room. "I didn't know you were coming. We would have prepared a proper welcome." She clasped his hands warmly and glanced between us, utterly delighted. Chloe's face went from pale to ashen. Mason looked utterly confused, his eyes darting between his mother and Chloe as he tried to make sense of it. "Wait, you two know each other?" he asked, his voice tense. Mason's mother turned to him with a proud smile. "Of course. Ethan is one of the most respected investors and advisors in our company's board. He's been instrumental in guiding some of our biggest decisions." The room erupted into a low, confused murmur. Chloe stumbled back a step, her eyes locked on me in horror. I saw her grip Mason's arm as if she needed him to hold her upright. My mom pressed a hand to her chest, looking like she might faint. My dad stood frozen, his mouth slightly open as if stuck mid-breath. It was in that moment that everything shifted. The tension, the years of being overlooked, the quiet shame they had tried to plant in me, all of it evaporated. I watched Chloe's perfect, glittering world start to unravel right in front of her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I felt powerful. Ethan gently squeezed my hand, and I looked up at him, seeing the pride in his eyes. I finally knew I had made the right choice. I hadn't come to destroy anyone. I had come to claim my place, to show them that I existed beyond their limited view of me. And as I stood there in that room full of stunned faces, I felt something shift deep inside me. I was done waiting for an invitation to be part of my own family story. In the heavy silence that followed Mason's mother's excited greeting, I felt every pair of eyes on me, each gaze a mixture of shock, confusion, and something else I had never felt from them before: fear. Chloe's hand trembled on Mason's arm as she tried to steady herself, but her eyes were locked on Ethan, then darting to me, then back again, as if she were trying to wake up from a nightmare she didn't understand. Mason looked at her, his brows furrowed, his mouth twisting in confusion and disbelief. His mother turned to me next, her expression softening into something almost maternal, as she reached out and took my free hand. "And you must be Ivy," she said, squeezing my hand warmly. "Ethan has spoken so highly of you. It's an honor to finally meet you." Her words felt like a spark, lighting up a part of me that had been buried for so long. All the years of being overlooked, all the times my accomplishments were brushed aside, it felt like the universe had swung open a door I had been pounding on for decades. Ethan stood tall beside me, his calm confidence wrapping around me like armor. His fingers tightened around mine, a silent reminder that I wasn't standing there alone. I looked at Chloe, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw the cracks beneath her perfect exterior. Her lips parted as she stuttered, her eyes wide with panic. I didn't think, she started, but the words stuck in her throat, strangled by her own lies. Mason turned to her sharply. You didn't think what, Chloe? He demanded, his voice low but firm. Chloe looked at me like she might collapse, her perfectly curled hair slipping from behind her ear as she shook her head in tiny, desperate movements. I felt my breath even out, my heart slow to a steady, determined rhythm. This was my moment, not to scream, not to accuse, but to finally be seen. I took a small step forward, feeling Ethan move with me. I wasn't invited, I said, my voice strong and clear, because according to my family, I wasn't close enough to be here today. Chloe told you she didn't have a sister, didn't she? Mason's eyes shot back to Chloe, his jaw clenching as the realization sank in. Around us, I heard the gasps of guests, the sharp intakes of breath as they began to connect the dots. My mother moved forward then, her eyes wide with tears she wasn't yet brave enough to let fall. Ivy, please, she whispered, her voice trembling. But I didn't stop. I turned to face the room fully, finally stepping out of the shadows they had kept me in all my life. My name is Ivy, I said, my voice unwavering. I am Chloe's sister, the one they chose to hide because I didn't fit the perfect story, the one they called the black sheep, the outsider. But I built my life without them. I became successful on my own terms, and I found someone who loves me for exactly who I am, not who they wanted me to be. Ethan's hand slid protectively to the small of my back, his warmth anchoring me as my words settled over the room like a heavy fog. Chloe's face crumpled, her tears finally breaking free as she tried to reach for Mason, but he stepped back, shaking his head slowly. You lied to me, he said, his voice raw with hurt, about everything. Chloe fell to her knees then, her shoulders shaking violently, her sobs echoing off the walls that had once felt so carefully curated and safe. My mom collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands, while my dad stood frozen, his face ashen, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't find any words at all. I felt a strange peace wash over me as I stood there, the chaos swirling around me like a storm I was no longer part of. I had spent my entire life trying to earn their love, trying to mold myself into someone they might one day accept. But in that moment, I realized I had never needed their validation. I had always been enough. All the years of quiet strength, all the times I stood up after they pushed me down, it had all led me to this moment. I turned slightly to look at Ethan, and he met my gaze with eyes full of pride and unspoken love. I squeezed his hand once more before turning back to the room. I didn't come here to hurt anyone, I said softly, but with a power that filled every corner of that house. I came here to stop hiding, to finally show you who I really am. And with that, I stood a little taller, my shoulders back, my head high, knowing that for the first time in my life, I wasn't the forgotten sister in the corner. I was Ivy, seen, heard, and finally free. For a few moments after I finished speaking, it felt like the whole world had gone silent. The music that had been playing softly in the background stopped, or maybe someone turned it off. I couldn't even tell. All I could hear was the frantic beat of my own heart, steady now in a way it had never been at any family event before. Chloe stayed crumpled on the floor, her glittering dress pooling around her like a broken fairy tale. Mason stood above her, staring down with an expression that flickered between rage and heartbreak. His mother turned to look at Chloe with a cold disappointment that seemed to cut deeper than any scream. The guests who had once buzzed around her like moths to a flame were frozen in small clusters, clutching their drinks, whispering furiously behind shaking hands, their eyes darting from Chloe to me and back again as they tried to piece together what had just unfolded in front of them. I felt Ethan's steady warmth at my back, a silent fortress that gave me the final ounce of courage I didn't know I still needed. My mother finally stood up from her chair, her face pale and wet, her hands outstretched like she was reaching for a child she had let slip through her fingers. "Ivy, please, let's talk about this privately," she begged, her voice cracked and small. But for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink away or look down. I met her gaze head on. "There's nothing left to say in private," I told her. "I spent my entire life in private shadows, trying to be good enough to stand in the same light as Chloe. You made sure I stayed there, but I'm done hiding, so no one else feels uncomfortable." My father looked like he had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. His strong, silent presence had always loomed large in my life, more powerful than any words he could have spoken. He had always made his feelings clear without having to say much. Chloe was the perfect daughter, and I was simply there. Now his lips trembled, his jaw clenched as if he wanted to intervene but didn't know how. It almost looked like he might finally say something, maybe an apology, maybe anything at all, but he stayed silent, staring at me as though seeing me for the first time, and realizing too late that I had become someone he couldn't control, someone he didn't even really know. Chloe finally pushed herself up from the floor, her makeup streaked, her eyes wild. "Why did you come here?" she screamed, her voice breaking into sharp, splintering pieces. "You ruined everything. This was supposed to be my perfect night." I looked at her, feeling nothing but a hollow, calm sadness. "I didn't come here to ruin anything," I said, my voice low but strong. "I came here to exist, to stop pretending that I didn't matter, to remind you, and everyone else, that I am here and I always was, even when you pretended I wasn't." Mason took a slow step back, shaking his head in disbelief. "You lied to me," he said to Chloe, each word falling like a hammer. "You lied about your sister, about your family. What else did you lie about?" Chloe reached for him, but he stepped out of her grasp, his face closing off as he turned away. The horror in her eyes was unmistakable. The perfect life she had built so carefully was crashing down around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. I looked around at the guests, their shocked, wide eyes locked on me. I could almost hear their thoughts. How could they not have known? How had this sister been hidden so easily? But I no longer felt the sting of their curiosity. For the first time, their attention didn't feel suffocating. It felt like freedom. Ethan squeezed my hand, and when I looked up at him, he was smiling. A quiet, proud smile that made my heart swell with a warmth I had waited my whole life to feel. "I think we're done here," I finally said, turning to Ethan. His arm slipped protectively around my waist as we began to walk toward the door. The hush in the room followed us like a ghost, every footstep echoing louder than the music ever had. As we passed by Chloe, she reached out, her fingers brushing the fabric of my dress. I paused just long enough to meet her eyes. "I hope one day you learn what it means to truly be seen," I whispered to her, not with anger, but with a strange, quiet pity. Then I turned and walked out, leaving her grasping at empty air. The moment we stepped outside, I felt the crisp night air hit my face, and I drew in the deepest, cleanest breath of my life. For the first time, I wasn't carrying their judgment on my shoulders. I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't apologizing. I was standing beside the man who loved me exactly as I was, finally taking up all the space I had always deserved. As we walked down the driveway hand in hand, I felt lighter than I had ever felt before, and I knew without a doubt that I would never go back to being invisible again. When Ethan and I got back to the car, I felt like I had stepped out of a suffocating tunnel and into open air for the first time in my life. I sank into the passenger seat, my body trembling as though I had run a marathon. Ethan reached over and took my hand without saying a word, just holding it tightly, his thumb tracing slow, steady circles over my skin until my breath returned to normal. As we pulled away from the house, I glanced back one last time and watched the twinkling lights of the party fade into the darkness behind us. a perfect metaphor for the version of myself I was leaving behind. I didn't feel regret or guilt or fear, just a deep, raw relief that settled into my bones like a long-awaited exhale. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls and messages. Some were from my mom, frantic and desperate, her words stumbling over apologies and pleas to talk privately. Others were from distant relatives, half shocked, half curious, asking if what they heard was true. A few messages were from Luke, my younger brother, who had stayed silent during the entire party. His messages were hesitant but tender, asking if I was okay and saying he wished he had stood up for me when it mattered. Reading his words, I felt a bittersweet warmth. At least someone had seen me, even if he had been too scared to say it out loud. My mom finally showed up at my apartment a few days later. She stood in the hallway clutching a small container of homemade soup, her eyes swollen from crying. When I opened the door, she looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Her shoulders hunched, her face lined with a vulnerability I didn't know she was capable of showing. "Ivy, please," she whispered, her voice breaking as tears pooled in her eyes. "I didn't realize how much we hurt you." I let her inside, not because I was ready to forgive, but because I needed to hear her say the words. She sat at my kitchen table and fumbled through apologies, her hands twisting around each other like she was wringing out the truth she had ignored for years. She told me she had always tried to keep the peace, to protect Chloe's fragile sense of perfection, and that somewhere along the line, she had forgotten she had another daughter who needed to be protected too. I listened, my heart both heavy and lighter than it had ever felt. For the first time, I wasn't desperate for her approval. I wasn't hanging on to every word, hoping to finally feel chosen. I was simply there, whole and grounded in my own self-worth, no longer waiting for anyone else to validate it. When she finished, I told her that I appreciated her coming, but I needed time. I explained that I didn't know what our relationship would look like moving forward, that I wasn't going to pretend nothing had happened just to keep the family image intact. She nodded through her tears, and for the first time, I saw her truly listen. Chloe didn't reach out, not at first. Weeks passed, and I heard through a mutual acquaintance that Mason had called off the engagement. Apparently, he couldn't reconcile the web of lies she had spun around her perfect life. Chloe moved back home temporarily, and though part of me felt a tiny pang of sadness for the sister I had once adored, most of me felt free. She had built her world on a foundation of illusions, and when it crumbled, she had nowhere left to stand. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel victorious in a petty way. Instead, I felt vindicated. I had walked through the fire and come out stronger on the other side. Meanwhile, Ethan stood beside me through it all, his quiet support like a steady lighthouse guiding me home. We spent more nights talking late into the evening, cooking dinners together, planning the wedding we had put on hold, because I had once been afraid to share my joy. Now those plans felt different. They felt real, fully mine. We sent out invitations not to prove anything to anyone, but to celebrate with the people who truly saw us. As I sat in my apartment weeks later, sunlight spilling across the floor and Ethan humming in the kitchen, I finally understood what it meant to choose yourself, to stop shrinking, to stop asking for scraps of love from people too afraid to give it. I realized that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to stand up and say, "I deserve to be here. I always have." If I could tell anyone watching my story one thing, it would be this: you are not obligated to fit into the small space others carve out for you. You can take up all the space you need. You can be too much for the wrong people and still be exactly enough for yourself. As I looked around my life, at Ethan, at my work, at my quiet strength, I knew I had finally, fully stepped into my own light. And for the first time in my life, that light felt warm, free, and completely mine.